There exists a form of inner discipline so profound that even accomplished men pause in recognition when they witness it in another. Today, you will discover the ancient Japanese principle that transforms overthinking from your greatest enemy into nothing more than morning mist that dissolves before the rising sun. Have you ever encountered someone whose mind never wavers? Who faces uncertainty without the endless internal debate that paralyzes most people? While others spiral into analysis and second-guessing, drowning in their own thoughts, this person moves with the clarity of still water reflecting moonlight. And when you ask them how they do it, they speak of something the samurai called ku no Sekai, the realm of emptiness where overthinking cannot survive. This is not meditation as the modern world teaches it. This is not positive thinking or mindfulness apps. This is an ancient system of mental architecture developed in the temples and training grounds of feudal Japan, where a wandering mind could mean serious consequences, and inner clarity meant survival. The warriors who mastered this principle didn't just stop overthinking. They reconstructed their very identity so completely that overthinking became impossible. But there is a price. This transformation requires you to dissolve the part of yourself that believes thinking more will somehow create better outcomes. Before I reveal exactly how this system works, comment below with the one area where overthinking has cost you the most. This helps me understand where you are in your journey and shows me you are ready for what comes next. The story I am about to share begins with a software engineer named David. Intelligent, capable, successful by every external measure. But David carried within him a quiet inner conflict that no one could see. His mind was a relentless mental arena where the same thoughts fought the same battles every single day without resolution. Every morning he would wake with the weight of decisions pressing down heavily on him. Should he take the promotion that required relocating? Was his relationship truly right for him? Should he start that business idea? Or was it just another fantasy? The questions circled like vultures, each one spawning 3 more, until his mental energy was consumed before his day even began. David tried everything the modern world offered. Meditation apps that promised peace in 10 minutes a day, journaling exercises to organize his thoughts, decision-making frameworks that only created more variables to analyze. The harder he tried to think his way out of overthinking, the deeper he sank into the quicksand of his own mind. This is the trap that catches most people. They believe the solution to too much thinking is better thinking, smarter thinking, more organized thinking. But the ancient masters of Japan understood something that modern psychology is only beginning to rediscover. The problem is not what you are thinking. The problem is that you believe you are the one who must solve everything through thought alone. In the mountain temples of medieval Japan, there lived monks who faced a different kind of challenge. Their minds, like David's, would race with doubts, desires, fears, and endless mental commentary. But unlike David, they had access to a system that had been refined over centuries of practice. They understood that the mind which tries to control itself is like a hand trying to grasp water. The tighter you squeeze, the more it slips away. David's transformation began on a night when his overthinking reached a breaking point. He had been lying awake for 3 hours, his mind cycling through the same scenarios, the same fears, the same unanswerable questions. In his desperation, he found himself researching ancient Japanese philosophy, searching for something, anything, that might offer a different approach. That is when he encountered the writings of Takuan Soho, a Zen monk who advised the greatest swordsman of his era. Takuan wrote of something called ku no Sekai, which translates roughly as the realm of emptiness. But this emptiness was not the absence of everything. It was the presence of awareness without the constant chatter of the thinking mind. Takuan explained that a swordsman whose mind was filled with thoughts about technique, strategy, or outcome would be defeated by one whose mind was like clear water. The empty mind is not vacant. It is infinitely responsive, able to act without the delay of analysis, able to perceive without the distortion of mental commentary. David read these words and felt something shift inside him, like a door opening to a room he had never known existed. But understanding the concept intellectually was just the beginning. The real work lay in actually entering this realm of emptiness, and for that, he needed to learn what the masters called the practice of dissolution. The ancient texts spoke of overthinking as a form of mental possession, where thoughts become like persistent mental shadows that multiply and feed on attention. The more you fight them directly, the stronger they become. But there was another way, a path that did not involve fighting the thoughts, but rather removing the ground on which they could stand. This ground, the masters taught, was the illusion that you are separate from the flow of life itself, that you must figure everything out, control every outcome, anticipate every possibility. When this illusion dissolved, overthinking lost its foundation and collapsed like a house built on sand. The first principle David learned was what the masters called Mu Shin, the mind of no mind. This was not about making the mind blank or suppressing thoughts. It was about discovering the awareness that exists before thoughts arise, the space in which all thoughts appear and disappear. Every morning at 5:30, David began to practice what Takuan called seated emptiness. Not meditation as most people understand it, but a specific form of awareness training that the samurai used to prepare their minds for high-pressure situations. He would sit in complete stillness, and instead of trying to stop thoughts or control his mind, he would simply observe the space between thoughts. At first, this space seemed non-existent. Thoughts arose so rapidly that there appeared to be no gap between them. But gradually, like learning to see stars that were always there, David began to notice the brief moments of silence that preceded each thought, the pause between mental activities. The masters taught that this space was not empty in the way most people imagine emptiness. It was alive, aware, responsive. It was the natural state of consciousness before it became cluttered with the endless commentary of the thinking mind. And the more time David spent resting in this space, the less power his thoughts had to disturb his inner stillness. But the real breakthrough came when he learned the second principle, what the texts called feudal, the immovable mind. This was not about becoming rigid or inflexible. It was about developing a center of awareness that remained stable regardless of what thoughts or emotions arose. David discovered that overthinking was not really about the thoughts themselves, but about his relationship to them. When a worrying thought arose, he would immediately become identified with it, believing that he was the one who was worried, that the thought represented some truth about his situation that required immediate attention and analysis. Fudoshin taught him to relate to thoughts the way a mountain relates to weather. Storms may rage around the mountain, but the mountain itself remains unmoved. Clouds may cover its peak, but they do not change its essential nature. Similarly, thoughts and emotions could arise in his awareness without disturbing his fundamental peace. 3 weeks into his training, David encountered what the masters called the first barrier. His mind, sensing that its dominance was being threatened, began to generate even more thoughts, more urgent concerns, more compelling reasons why he needed to analyze and figure things out. This is where most people abandon the practice. The overthinking seems to get worse before it gets better, and the temptation is to return to the familiar patterns of mental struggle. But David had learned about this phase from the ancient texts. They called it the mind's final resistance, the last attempt of the old patterns to maintain their hold. The masters taught a specific technique for this phase, called ku no kokyu, the breathing of emptiness. Every time David noticed his mind beginning to spiral into overthinking, he would return to his breath, not as a relaxation technique, but as a way of reconnecting with the space of awareness that existed before thoughts began. With each exhale, he would release not just air, but the compulsion to solve, to figure out, to control. With each inhale, he would draw in the vast spaciousness that the masters called original mind. This was not visualization or imagination. It was a direct recognition of the awareness that had always been present, unclouded by the storm of thinking. The transformation was subtle at first. David noticed that certain thoughts that used to trigger hours of mental analysis would simply arise and pass away without gaining traction. Problems that seemed urgent and complex in the evening would appear simple and manageable in the morning after his practice. His colleagues began to comment on the change. In meetings, while others debated endlessly, David would listen from a place of quiet clarity and often offer solutions that seemed obvious once stated, but had somehow escaped everyone else's consideration. He was not thinking less. He was thinking from a different place entirely. 6 weeks into his practice, David discovered what the masters considered the most profound aspect of Ku no Sekai. It was not just a technique for managing thoughts, but a complete reconstruction of identity itself. The person who overthinks believes fundamentally that they are separate from life, that they must figure everything out through mental effort alone. But the realm of emptiness revealed a different truth. David began to experience what the samurai called ichigo ichie, the understanding that each moment is complete and unrepeatable, requiring not analysis but presence. When he stopped trying to control outcomes through thinking, life began to flow with a natural intelligence that surpassed anything his analytical mind could produce. This was the secret that the greatest warriors carried into battle. They did not fight from a place of thinking, but from a place of being, allowing their actions to arise spontaneously from the situation itself, rather than from predetermined plans or mental strategies. David realized that overthinking was ultimately a form of resistance to life as it is. By constantly analyzing, planning, and worrying, he was trying to create a sense of safety and control that was ultimately illusory. The realm of emptiness taught him to trust the intelligence that moves the sun and stars, the same intelligence that beats his heart and grows his hair without any conscious effort on his part. As his practice deepened, David found that decisions which used to paralyze him with endless analysis now became clear and obvious. Not because he had figured them out, but because he had stopped interfering with his natural wisdom. Like water finding its way downhill, right action emerged naturally when the obstruction of overthinking was removed. People began to seek his counsel, sensing in him a quality of presence and clarity that was both calming and inspiring. They could not name what was different about him, but they felt it in his stillness, in the way he listened without immediately jumping to conclusions or offering quick fixes. But the true test of Ku no Sekai was yet to come, because the masters understood something that escapes most modern practitioners. Emptiness is not a state you achieve once and maintain forever. It is a living practice that must be renewed each moment, especially when the world conspires to pull you back into the familiar chaos of mental struggle. 2 months into David's practice, life presented him with what the ancient texts called the Great Examination. His company announced sudden layoffs. His relationship faced unexpected strain. His father was diagnosed with a significant health challenge. Each event arrived like arrows shot from different directions, designed to challenge his newfound inner stillness. The old David would have been overwhelmed, his mind fracturing into 1,000 fragments of worry, analysis, and desperate planning. But something had fundamentally shifted in his internal architecture. Where once there had been a mind that reacted to every stimulus, there was now what the masters called feudal no kokoro, the heart that does not move. This was not indifference or emotional numbness. David felt the full weight of each situation, the natural human responses of concern and care. But underneath these surface emotions, there remained an unshakable foundation of awareness that was not disturbed by the storm above. The samurai had a saying, "The sword is tested not in the dojo, but on the battlefield." Similarly, the practice of Ku no Sekai revealed its true power not in moments of peace, but in the crucible of real-world challenges. Each difficult circumstance became an opportunity to deepen his understanding of what it meant to live from emptiness rather than from the compulsive need to control outcomes through mental effort. When his colleagues panicked about the layoffs, spending hours speculating about who might be affected and developing elaborate strategies to protect their positions, David found himself responding from a different place entirely. He updated his resume, reached out to contacts, and prepared for various possibilities, but without the underlying anxiety that had once driven such activities. His actions arose not from fear, but from what the masters called natural intelligence, the spontaneous response that emerges when the mind is clear of the debris of overthinking. He was not passive or fatalistic. He was actively engaged, but without attachment to specific outcomes, trusting in his ability to respond appropriately to whatever actually occurred, rather than exhausting himself preparing for scenarios that might never materialize. The texts spoke of warriors who could enter battle with what appeared to be supernatural calm, not because they did not value their lives, but because they had discovered something more fundamental than the personal self that seeks to preserve itself through control and manipulation. David was beginning to taste this same freedom in the smaller battles of daily life. As David's practice matured, he encountered what the masters warned was the most subtle trap on the path to emptiness. He began to take pride in his newfound clarity, to identify himself as someone who had transcended overthinking. This very identification became a new form of mental activity, a more sophisticated version of the same problem he had set out to solve. The ancient teachings were clear about this phase. Takuan wrote that the mind which congratulates itself on being empty is not truly empty. The awareness that observes thoughts without disturbance must also release any sense of being the observer. True ku no Sekai meant the dissolution not just of mental chatter, but of the one who sought to escape mental chatter. This was perhaps the most challenging aspect of the entire practice. David had to learn to let go of his investment in being someone who no longer overthought, someone who had achieved inner peace, someone who embodied ancient wisdom. These identities, however positive they seemed, were still constructions of the thinking mind and therefore obstacles to the natural state of clear awareness. The masters taught a practice they called Jishin no Shi, the death of the self-image. Each morning, along with his seated emptiness practice, David would deliberately release any story about who he was or what he had accomplished. He would return to what they called Honrai no Menmoku, original face, the awareness that exists before any identity forms around it. When the identity of the seeker finally dissolved, David discovered what the masters had promised all along. Ku no Sekai was not a destination to reach, but the recognition of what had always been present. The realm of emptiness was not somewhere else. It was the very awareness in which overthinking had always appeared and disappeared like waves on an ocean that remained forever undisturbed. 6 months after beginning his practice, David no longer resembled the man who had once lain awake analyzing endless scenarios. But the change was so natural, so integrated, that he could barely remember what it felt like to be trapped in the prison of his own thoughts. The transformation had happened not through adding something new, but through removing the barriers that had obscured his natural clarity. People noticed something different about his presence, something they could not name but could not ignore. In a world of constant mental noise and endless distraction, he moved through life with the quiet authority of someone who had found the eye of the storm. His very existence became a reminder that another way of being was possible. This is the gift that Ku no Sekai offers to anyone willing to walk the path of dissolution. Not the promise of a perfect life without challenges, but the discovery of an unshakable foundation that remains calm, regardless of what storms may come. The ancient masters understood that true freedom is not the ability to control circumstances, but the recognition that you are the awareness in which all circumstances arise and pass away. If this ancient wisdom has stirred something within you, share in the comments what aspect of overthinking you are ready to release. Your declaration becomes the first step toward entering the realm of emptiness where your truest self awaits. Now it's your turn to step onto the path. In the comments below, declare the identity you choose to embody from this day forward. Not a goal, not a plan, an identity. Who do you become when hesitation ends? Write it, seal it, and let this be the first step of your own unbreakable self.